July 8th or 9th, morning. Second meeting with Srila Prabhupada on initiations. Okay, so I saw things also had to be re-edited in this timeline as well. Tamal wrote in his diary entry for July 8th, 1977. I quote from his entry in a diary. This morning in the garden, I asked Srila Prabhupada what we should do regarding initiations. He said, give me a list of sannyasis, and I shall mark which ones. You can do, Kirtanananda Maharaj, Satsarup Maharaj can do, Jayatirtha, Bhagavan, Harikesh Swami. 5 or 6 men, whoever is nearest, they can give first and second initiation. In India, Jayapataka Maharaj, and you are also there. You are also in India. Rameshwar Maharaj and Hridayananda. So without waiting for me, whoever you consider is right, and I put in to be initiated as Prabhupada's disciple, whoever you consider is right, that will depend upon your discretion. The next morning, this is still, I'm quoting from that diary entry, the next morning, Srila Prabhupada added Hamsaduta Maharaj and Bhavananda Maharaj. These 11 devotees are called Rtvik, representatives of the Acarya. End of quote. This diary entry does faithfully correspond as much as possible to the actual recording of the conversation held on, this is either the 7th or the 8th. However, several things to note. First of all, in his entry for what Tamal says was July 8th, the last line mentions the next morning, which according to Tamal would have been the 9th. But his 9th day entry of his diary mentions nothing of any ongoing meeting on this topic. But that entry that Tamal says was for the 8th couldn't have included anything about the next day, which hadn't taken place yet. So the BBT dating and Gauridas Pandit's dates may actually be correct. What Tamal wrote down in his diary as being on the July 8th entry most likely had all taken place on the 7th, and that the last line regarding the next morning was what actually took place on the morning of the 8th, the day that he wrote all of this down into the diary. All that would mean is that Srila Prabhupada had worked on perfecting the message in the July 9th letter from the 7th, 8th, and 9th, 3 days, number of meetings held over a 3-day span. But what I really wanted to point out here is the fact that it was in that second meeting on this topic that according to Tamal's diary, that is when Srila Prabhupada came up with the formal and official title for those Rtviks, now calling them formally Rtvik Representatives of the Acarya. Obviously, it was within that second meeting that Srila Prabhupada has now formally begun to dictate what would become the Rtvik Directive or the July 9th letter and finalize the system as to how he wanted initiations conducted for after he has departed. As he had said in May, after he has settled how that system was to be conducted, after that is settled, then he would select some men to act as officiating Rtviks. And by the second meeting, as he dictated this letter, we see that he has already finalized the formal title for those officiating representative Rtviks, Rtvik Representatives of the Acarya. Also, he adds 2 more men, Hamsaduta Maharaj and Bhavananda Maharaj. But what I find somewhat disturbing and out of place is the fact that in his entry for the July 9th and 10th, he mentions absolutely nothing at all about any other meeting regarding this topic or the dictation, writing, and signing of the July 9th letter itself. Rather, for the 9th entry of the 9th, he only writes regarding how Srila Prabhupada is disturbed that Gopal Krishna was disturbed because Srila Prabhupada was appointing another devotee to be GBC for Delhi. Then he wrote about a court case and a case where deprogrammers were taking devotees to court over a 16-year-old who was living at the temple. Here, according to Tamal, Srila Prabhupada used the word Rtvik, but only to say that it was better that the Rtviks go to court on his behalf. Otherwise, they would have wanted to drag him into the court. But that was the only mention of Rtvik for that day. Very conspicuous by its absence is any mention of the July 9th letter at all.
Srila Prabhupada had many times in the past asked various GBC men to perform initiation ceremonies on his behalf. My second initiation in 1975 was performed by Hridayananda Maharaj. But Srila Prabhupada had never given a formal title to those who would perform initiations on his behalf. Why the formalities now, if the system he was setting up was just for a few initiations that would take place on the final days before he departs? Also, in the July 7th recording, there is no mention that a formal directive be written that Prabhupada could sign. Srila Prabhupada made that request in a later meeting, after he decided that this will be the settled up system that he wants for after he departs. Yet he considered that the subject matter that was being discussed with Tamal that accumulated in the July 9th directive was of such significant importance that despite his critically weak health, Srila Prabhupada held multiple meetings over at least 2 or 3, even 4 days to assure that the document that Tamal was transcribing on his behalf would convey his instructions and message faithfully. When Srila Prabhupada's health was good and he wanted the GBC to perform initiations on his behalf, a brief verbal instruction was all that was needed, or a single sentence mentioning this in a letter that dealt with other topics. Yet here, when Srila Prabhupada is so weak, he has to take long pauses between words. He is bedridden. He is coughing up. His health is critical, yet he holds multiple meetings over a number of days to have a formal written document on a topic that when his health was good, he would only have taken a few minutes to just give a short verbal request and be done with it. Despite his critical condition, he takes the time and effort to assure that this formally written and signed document faithfully represents his desires. He gives a title to those who are going to be performing these aspects of this, the initiation process, which before he had never given formal titles to. That is why the logic is that this document was documenting what Srila Prabhupada wanted going forward for after he departed.